Excellent, guys. So first of all, hi everyone. Welcome to the OpenStack and Beyond podcast, the sixth podcast. This time we're going to talk about, in my view, a very interesting topic, kind of prediction, which I think compiles for 2016, specifically around OpenStack, and because that actually compiles a lot of the news from the industry, and kind of I think will stretch the knowledge of each one of you to kind of look at the data that we've experienced and collected so far, and try to use that in an intelligent way to kind of predict what's going to happen. So I hope it will be entertaining and interesting. So by all means, feel free to add your own stuff here.
Sure.
I will start with a quick introduction to the panelists here. We'll start with Laurent.
Okay. Oh, hi. Laurent Lachal from Ovum. I'm an industry analyst. I cover cloud computing. I've been doing so for about 4 to 5 years, and I've been following OpenStack in the past 2-3 years. I've been in the Paris and Vancouver summits, and I missed the Tokyo one, but because I had to go to the Oracle Open World Summit. But I still kept an eye on it.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Jason, you're next.
Hi, Jason Cannavale from Rackspace. I am a Senior Director of Product Development for our OpenStack private cloud business. I have been involved with OpenStack since the Bear release, so for quite some time.
Next one is Avishay.
Hi everybody, I'm Avishay Traeger from Stratoscale. I'm a system architect here. Previously I was also a Cinder core member for about 3 or 4 releases. So I'm heavily involved in the community as well.
Excellent. So I think as a kind of a way to kick off the discussion here, what we think we've seen in 2015, and I think we've all experienced. I would call 2015 the year of the cloud, because there's been many news. For example, the latest one being Dell and obviously MC, but before that, Docker went to Foundation, and Google I think made good head starts with Kubernetes, and obviously the new releases from OpenStack this year. So I wanted to kind of start maybe with a quick summary of 2015, and each one of you could say what was the biggest news in his view of 2015 before we move to the rest of the topic. So Laurent, why don't you start?
My biggest news, as far as you mean OpenStack is concerned, or the general
I think
cloud market?
General cloud, and try to be, obviously leaning towards OpenStack.
Okay. Well, they are. I mean, the Linux Foundation. That's right. The OpenStack Foundation is trying to make OpenStack more enterprise focused, moving from deployment to management, ease of administration. And they've got this Win the Enterprise program. So the whole shift, the whole improvement of focus from just away from just technology towards more of an enterprise, how the enterprise use OpenStack is, I think, the core and most important shift as far as OpenStack is concerned. And the problem is that it has only just started, and it's making baby step, and it needs to be better, wider, deeper.
Excellent. Anyone else wants to add his news from last year, from this year actually?
Yes, I can add. Similarly, when I look at the various summits, hearing what the developers are talking about, it's also less concentrated on shiny new features and more towards stabilizing OpenStack, getting it ready for enterprise. We also see more and more interest in OpenStack, more deployments. So it looks like we're heading in a good direction.
Good. Jason.
Yes. So I was actually going to say the move to Big Tent, the separation of just 4 or 5 core projects into now allowing many core projects. To Laurent's earlier point, that cover a much wider span of the cloud ecosystem than we have in the past. I think it was an interesting move by the foundation. Rather than tightening the core, they actually expanded who would be able to be a core.
It is a good move. The dev core is a good move. However, it is confusing, and it's been acknowledged in the latest results of the survey. People are afraid of a lack of focus, which is ironic because it's all about focusing more on the core bits and rather than the bigger ecosystem. So while it's the right thing to do, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of explaining it to the market at large.
Well, if you look at DevCore as the example of how long it takes OpenStack to explain something,
yes.
DevCore has been in flight for 2 years, and we're finally there, I think.
Yeah. So it'll take a couple of years, agree, for Big Tent to kind of be understood.
Excellent. I think that's an excellent segue for towards 2016, because I think we're going to reiterate some of the items that you just discussed. I wanted to start with what I would call the elephant in the room here. One of the things that I've encountered is that we use Linux as the kind of a close parallel to what's happening in OpenStack, and also when we're using predictions, we kind of look at the way Linux has been adopted in enterprises and so forth as probably the model in which OpenStack is going to be consumed by enterprises. And we're using similar techniques, basically taking the open source, creating a distro, and having companies behind that distro to sell that. Red Hat, Mirantis, HP, everyone is taking that type of strategy. But one thing that kind of occurred to me when I've read these surveys and when I've seen the reports and when I've met customers themselves, is it really the parallel of Linux? Is it going to be consumed like Linux? Isn't that a much bigger thing?
Yeah, no, it's as a project, yes, it is like Linux, and Linux is a kind of the standard in terms of how projects are structured, and OpenStack is similar. Although it doesn't have the wealth of non-commercial distributions like Fedora or OpenSUSE. But it's much more complicated than an operating system, and it's much less clearly defined. Everybody knows what an operating system is. It's much less the case in terms of what a cloud management platform is. It's not OpenStack fault. It's just the market is very fluid, especially now that there's a more complication added to it with the emergence of containers that introduce yet another platform into the mix. So in fact, what people have to manage is not just the complexity of each of these platforms, but also they will end up having multiple platforms. And VMware is a good example of a company that recently has just announced 2 container-centric platforms, one on top of WebSphere and another one completely brand new. There's nothing to do with WebSphere. So you have VMware has WebSphere as their OpenStack distribution, have their WebSphere container platform, and have their non-WebSphere native container platform. So with all these platforms waving in the breeze, it's a real challenge to kind of pick the right one and then bring them together. I don't think there's going to be one answer to enterprises' expectation in terms of next generation platform, and that's a real challenge.
Well, basically, Laurent, I think you're pointing to the fact that what's happening in OpenStack is that it's kind of taking its own life and it's becoming different things. It's not necessarily the same open source that is going to be packaged and then distributed. Like in the case of Linux, it's going to be packaged in very different ways in which the actual package might.
Well, yes, there will be. There's lots of different packages, and it's complex. But also the context in which OpenStack is evolving is increasingly complex itself, with the emergence of new platforms, Mesosphere platforms, Swarm. So there's more options to choose from.
I see. And Jason, what do you think? Do you think that the parallel between OpenStack and Linux is becoming less and less relevant?
I do, actually. I believe that what we're starting to see, and Laurent started to get at this a little bit, is we're starting to see this shift from distributions of the software itself mattering to more about the operational impacts and how do I make this a hybrid cloud and how do I work with Azure and VMware and AWS as well as my private OpenStack cloud or a public OpenStack cloud. So I think in terms of the way that distributions have packaged software in the past, OpenStack's a very different beast from what Linux was.
Yeah, that's a very, I think, strong point here. I know, Avishay, that you're actually working on building a simpler distribution. So I think the Laurent point that distros are not going to necessarily be the way people package and consume OpenStack. So it's going to be different. Definitely, Stratoscale have that vision in mind. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So Stratoscale is building data center software infrastructure. We have OpenStack components internally, and we also expose OpenStack API outwards, as well as our own API. We found that OpenStack was missing a lot of key features. First of all, I have to say we love OpenStack. It got us a lot of the way there. But there are some things, for example, around workload migration, resilience, disaster recovery, that were missing. We replaced some components. For example, we have scheduling that takes all of the different components into account, the VMs and the containers and the storage, as opposed to having separate schedulers. And we tried to make everything more converged, make everything work tighter together. So maybe think of...
Would it be right to say that, Avishay, that using that kind of OpenStack as a universal API and not the actual implementation of OpenStack? Like in the case of VMware and Vaga, I think that's a good analogy in that regard.
Well, yeah, some would say that OpenStack is an API with the reference implementation. I don't know if I would go that far. Maybe if we go with the Linux comparison, maybe OpenStack is sort of the kernel, and you have the whole ecosystem around it, whatever separates, Red Hat from Ubuntu, from all the other distributions.
Okay, so I think that if I try to summarize that, I think that we're seeing the limitation of OpenStack, and I think that what we're seeing is different manifestation of how companies respond to that. One of them is kind of creating, if you like, a simpler distros that provides like more mature, like in the case of Vio, or more or simpler in the case of Stratoscale, where you're basically trying to create less moving parts by creating a consolidated infrastructure behind it, and kind of use OpenStack as a facade, as the API, as a universal API, and that's one option in which I think the industry is kind of driving OpenStack. The other direction, and I think we haven't discussed that yet, which is becoming a barrier, is how many people can actually operate in a cloud, not just OpenStack. Isn't the, and I think, Jason, you mentioned that the operational barrier, less the complexity of the distro itself, becomes even a bigger barrier. because most organizations don't have the skills to run that. And that's the assumption. What would be the actual target for OpenStack in that context? Jason, maybe you want to start on that.
Yeah, I think it was mentioned a minute ago that OpenStack makes a very interesting technology platform, right? And there's a big community around it pushing it forward very quickly. And I think that's important from a technology platform perspective, but that's not the end game for anybody, right? Is I now have to take this in and run it. And we heard just a second ago, it doesn't have DR, it doesn't have, infrastructure tolerance for failures. How do we solve those problems? And I think you tend to be right in that this cloud market has expanded so quickly, between Amazon and the other groups, including the OpenStack world, that the operational capabilities are still being built. A lot of people don't have them yet. A lot of people haven't had to think of infrastructure in this sense before, where it's just an API and there are just a set of simple services running behind it. So I think it's going to be interesting to see the companies and I don't really want to call it a distribution, but the companies and the technologists that can come out with ways to operate OpenStack much easier. I think that's where it lacks a lot of functionality today, actually, is the ability to keep it up and running. We heard on the survey, it's still very hard to install. It's still very hard to do by yourself. I think we all want to get away from that.
And the complexity is not just...
One specific question on that for you, Laurent, is that given that the skill set challenge, do you think that more and more enterprises and industry will go with a hosted model and kind of outsource the problem, quote unquote, to someone else, or do we still try to go with a distro as the main, a simpler distro like in the case of Stratoscale, or a more mature one like in the case of Bio, or we'll try to go with a more hosted model and outsource the problem completely?
Yeah. Well, managed cloud is an up-and-coming trend in the cloud computing market, and OpenStack is part of that. It's not the only one. Managed Amazon Web Services is also part of that. Overall, increasingly, an increasing number of people don't want to deal with the complexity of managing a cloud and would like to have that done by a third party, whether that cloud is an OpenStack private cloud or Amazon Web Services public cloud. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, I have people. That's driven the acquisition of Metascale. That's driven the acquisition of Blue Box recently. But to also, yes, absolutely. But it's not just about the complexity of OpenStack itself. It's also the complexity of a project around OpenStack. The creation of a private cloud is complicated. It's not just the technology itself. It's you have to do a lot more. There's a lot more operational pieces to work with. You have to do release management differently. You have a lot more scripting to deal with. So it's not just the complexity of OpenStack itself as much as the complexity of creating a cloud, a private cloud in many cases. That puts people off. It's not just OpenStack itself, although it is indeed complicated.
And Jason, I think I've seen a recent announcement by Rackspace that they're going to provide managed cloud services kind of in that time. Amazon and kind of abandon providing its own cloud, if I kind of got the message correctly.
No, actually, just to kind of clarify that, we are actually keeping our public cloud and our private cloud. If you think of what we're actually doing is we're supporting AWS in terms of if we have a customer that or somebody who wants us to manage their workloads on AWS for them or help them keep it up and running from an operational perspective. Similar thing we're doing with Azure. When you think about our OpenStack story, though, as one of the founders of OpenStack, we kind of see ourselves as, we're always going to have that component. We're always going to be doing something with OpenStack. We have no intention of shutting our public cloud or our private cloud at the current time.
I see. But do you see a shift, as I think Laurent mentioned, from consuming distro to a managed cloud in a private cloud space?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question.
I was asking, again, since we're in a prediction thing, do you see a shift from consuming distros of different likes to a point in which managed service or hosted service would become more popular than even distros themselves?
I think so, and I think we're starting to see that already. I mean, if you go back to what I was saying, where we're looking at Azure and AWS as well as OpenStack, that's being driven by demand. There are a lot of customers and a lot of people that are working on these technologies that simply, they're brand new to the space, or they haven't had as much, as many repetitions as they have in the past. I think for at least the foreseeable future, we're going to be seeing people looking for that operational experience and helping them make that jump to the cloud with legacy applications and other things that they may have. But I think we're starting to see it now.
Great. So I think if I kind of summarize the first point of the discussion here, I think we're definitely seeing the move towards simpler OpenStack, and OpenStack being used not just as a distro. One version of that would be like in the case of Vio, in the case of Amazon, VMware, or in the case of Stratoscale, where it becomes more of an API facade to another infrastructure. Another company, by the way, to watch here is Platform 9, that is providing kind of an easy way to run OpenStack on different clouds, including public clouds like Amazon. And I think we'll see more of that probably in the next year. The other point is the shift between consuming distro and assuming, like in the Linux world, that we'll manage it with the support of others, to a point in which we're going to be hosting or outsourcing the problem to a hosted manage. I personally believe that would be a bigger shift there in how people consume OpenStack, and I think some of you, Jason, and I think Laurent, you mentioned that as well as a trend toward 2016, and that brings me to the next question, which is I think it's very easy to notice. It's not too hard to notice that in the latest OpenStack events, there's been a lot of presence by telcos. So originally, OpenStack has been pretty much defined in enterprises, but now telcos are embracing it even more than enterprises with NFV and some other things. I'll start again with Laurent. What do you think about that? Why do you see telcos adopting OpenStack?
Well, there's two levels to this question. There's the telco suppliers as well as telcos, and they are connected in as much as the telcos are embracing OpenStack because their suppliers are embracing OpenStack. I'm talking about Ericsson, Alcatel-Lucent, Huawei. All these guys have put OpenStack at the center of their next generation platform. But OpenStack is very much one component of these platforms. These platforms have a much bigger footprint than OpenStack itself. So OpenStack becomes just something embedded in their platform. When you talk to you about Ericsson or Nokia. For other people like Huawei, it's maybe less embedded because Huawei is also a kind of a more generic platform provider. But overall, there is a kind of an adoption at these two levels, suppliers and telecom providers. And it was clear in the past few summits that I've attended where there was a big presence of telcos as well as a big a large number of discussions around things like software-defined networking and network NFV. Network function virtualization.
Yeah. So if I try to kind of move it to the prediction towards 2016. Do you see that trend continues? Do you see telco embracing OpenStack even more than enterprises? And is that related to?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Now that the suppliers are committed, the telcos are also committed to OpenStack. But again, that's OpenStack within a bigger context of next generation telecom platforms that deliver a lot of different services with OpenStack embedded into them.
Mm-hmm. And Jason, in the context of kind of convergence between enterprises and telcos, I mean, the fact that today, I mean, I think that in general, telcos has been 2 years or two generation behind enterprises with regard to their data center that was very much, fixed hardware. They didn't even, embrace virtualization to a degree, and all of a sudden they need to jump into a complete cloud operation, and all of a sudden both telcos and enterprises are now running almost the same operating system, which in that context, OpenStack. Do you see more convergence happening between the two industries?
I think so. I think the rush to cloud for the telcos is a bit of survival, right? So they've got Apple and others that are providing terabytes and terabytes of storage to consumers. Telcos need to be able to deliver something like that. And really, when you think about OpenStack and how big of a community that it is behind it, it gives some sense of confidence that there's enough people behind this that has enough of the features that I need around SDN. And the recent additions of NFV and SRIOV, that they can now start to look at it and start to look at how do I start to offer these servers or services to my end users who are getting picked up by satellite and cable companies all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think we can, and Avishay, if you want to, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we've been seeing similar things by us as well. More and more telcos are moving to OpenStack. They seem to be initially intrigued by the price of zero, but of course they need to invest a large amount of effort to get it running and productized. Some have been more successful than others at doing that, but it's definitely, I agree with Jason, part of their survival to do that.
Yeah.
Yes, and also what is interesting is that they've really changed their views and their attitude, because to start with, a lot of them wanted a carrier-grade OpenStack. They wanted their own version and changed their mind and kind of became full participants in the community, happy to wait for OpenStack to mature and to go in their direction. So that's a very positive change as part of, and also it's part of their efforts to have to deal with the convergence of telco system with more generic IT system, because it's also part of telco efforts to move out of their comfort zone into the brave new world of standard IT, IT product and software product and IT services.
Yep, excellent. I think that's so. Again, if I would conclude that point, I would say that there's a clear ROI, as I think you mentioned, for telcos to embrace OpenStack, which is basically, if you don't embrace it, you're good. So I think that's why we're seeing that that telcos are adopting OpenStack. Where in enterprises, I think the ROI is I think more challenged by other options. I think Laurent and Jason mentioned early on, and therefore we probably see them embracing OpenStack differently. And so I think that there's an agreement also that telcos are going to be probably even a bigger chunk of the adoption of OpenStack in the next year in 2016, given that statement here. That leads me to the next point in the prediction here, which is the platform as a service. One thing that I noticed in the user service, survey, the latest one from Tokyo, is that we've seen the OpenShift one, and we've seen Cloud Foundry in the list there, but I couldn't ignore the fact that out of the top 5, there's been completely new platforms like Kubernetes, obviously Docker is playing a big thing here. Also, our own product, which is Cloudify, has been listed there for the first time. So we're starting to see all of a sudden things under the PaaS category that wouldn't be categorized as PaaS before. How do you explain that? How do you? I'll start with Jason. Maybe you could take on that.
Sure. So it's interesting that platform as a service, exists as a term. It's always been a very complex set of things. The promise of being able to take your application and automate all the things onto your cloud, it's a big task to take on. So when you see things like Cloud Foundry, they're very complicated, and a lot of you're now adding complexity on top of complexity when you think about the cloud. I think the benefits we're seeing from Mesos and Kubernetes and Docker and some of these others it's dead simple, right? I mean, in a matter of seconds, I can have an application running inside of a container. It's fully networked and fully ready to go, and I'm not having to deal with all of the moving pieces around a Cloud Foundry or some of the other PaaS platforms. I think as we, if I was going to get back into prediction mode, as we go through the next year, you will see that shift become even more, or even wider than it is today, away from PaaS and onto containers.
And if you need to bet who would be the leading one between Cloud Foundry and which is right now in the survey the leading one, and second one is Kubernetes, who would you bet would be the leading one in the next survey?
I would imagine that it's going to be some combination of Swarm or Kubernetes that are in the lead by the end of next year. Swarm is nice because it's native to Docker. Kubernetes obviously has the Google pedigree, so it has some name recognition. It's also been stable for a bit longer. I do see Cloud Foundry starting to drop down that list a little bit as this starts to go a little bit faster.
Interesting. And Laurent, do you think that we still, the category of PaaS is still relevant? Do we need to come up with a different term for that layer?
Well, I mean, middleware has always been a difficult area to define. As much pre-cloud as it is post-cloud. So it's always been something difficult. And indeed, with containers, you have, as I was saying earlier, an extra way to do things. And it happens to be, as Jason mentioned, a way that is rather simple and fast, at least to start with. And then you have to deal with security management, troubleshooting, all that kind of stuff that needs to be done. And on that basis, I mean, the container platforms have still some territory to cover to catch up with more mature platforms. So there's really, yeah.
Real quick, I do think it's interesting how fast the tool set around containers is closing, right? So if you look at the Cloud Foundry world and some of those have taken a long time to get to where they are. But the containers is going fast.
It is absolutely true, but I don't think that the market is ready for that kind of speed, and a lot of enterprises will wait for the incumbent provider, like VMware, for example, or Red Hat or IBM, to come up with some sort of way to mix the old with the new. So, and my expectation is that, as I was saying earlier, enterprises are going to end up with several platforms. They will have pure PaaS, mostly on top of infrastructure as a service, so Cloud Foundry and OpenShift. They will have some native stuff, either on their own, a complete Mesosphere stack, or with a mix, so Kubernetes on top of OpenStack, for example. As I was mentioning, VMware has now 2 more platforms to its portfolio, in addition to VMware integrated OpenStack and vSphere to cater for containers. So there's going to be really a wealth of options, and people are going to have to mix and match those. I don't think that any of these applications are going to become the data center operating system of choice anytime soon, because they all have their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think it's going to be a giant mix of different platforms and picking the best technology and what works best for the skills and the skill set and the talent that you have in house to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I would add to that that I kind of think I picked two things. One of them is that a lot of the enterprises will wait for the incumbents to actually solve the piece of the transitioning complexity, which is how do I move to containers when not all my workload is near to containers. We'll have to kind of deal, at least in the next year, with how do you deal with that type of mixed workload environment, and a pure Docker, pure container environment would definitely be able to solve one part of the puzzle, but there's still that other part of the puzzle that needs to be sorted out. I tend to agree with Jason also that probably Kubernetes will see much stronger adoption of Kubernetes over other platforms as a service. Interestingly enough, OpenShift has taken, I think, in the right timing, transition itself towards Kubernetes. So it's interesting to see how much value it adds on top of Kubernetes that will make it still viable. That's kind of my perspective on that area. And I think to both of your points, we're definitely going to see a completely new kind of PaaS or application containers that are more geared towards automation than it is towards a platform, as we've seen before, with far greater options of choices and how do I structure my application than it used to be before, and that's going to drive the velocity there. I tend to agree with that as well. Coming back to Docker in that context, I think we've also seen Docker disrupting the infrastructure itself, and I think, Laurent, you mentioned, yeah, I missed Avishay. I'll get back to this question. So the question is, when we talk about Docker in the context of OpenStack, there's obviously Magnum as a project that integrates Kubernetes and integrate other platforms into that mix, Swarm in specifically, and now we're looking at using Docker as an infrastructure itself, and Docker in itself comes with an alternative stack for compute, with an alternative stack for networking, for storage. So is it going to be just another option to run and still use OpenStack as it is right now? Or are we expecting to see a second generation OpenStack that is much more container native, that is much simpler as a result of that, that basically picks up the Docker storage and compute and deal with that rather than using it just as another option to a VM?
I don't expect OpenStack to slim down to become a Docker or container-centric platform. Although I'm sure some OpenStack-based distribution could go in that direction. But as a project itself, OpenStack will remain this broad church that supports VM, containers, as well as bare metal. That's definitely the way it's going to remain. Yeah.
And Jason, what do you think?
So I think there's some interesting use cases that exist in OpenStack already. If you think about the ability to use Ironic and Cinder in interesting ways to provide a container platform or to provide a base for Kubernetes. I don't think that OpenStack is going to fundamentally change. I think it's going to be a series of more, here's the reference of how we would do that for a while. I do agree that distributions will eventually try to slim it down and fit the exact use case. But I think right now, containers aren't going to win until they get out of VMs. Right? Containers on bare metal are far more interesting than they are inside of VMs. But then you have the security context problems. And I think OpenStack provides a good ability to allow you to accelerate how quickly we're able to close those security holes.
Yeah, Yeah, we are in the middle of a alternative or complementary debate. Are container alternative or complementary to virtual machines, for example, or are container native platform complementary or alternative to things like OpenStack? And the answer, because it's a new area at the moment, the people who are the most vocal are those who are focusing on the alternative. They are mostly the startup people. But I think the market itself, the enterprise market, which has to deal with legacy, is very much about taking this complementary vision. So the market will absolutely be happy with this idea of VM being complementary to container, as well as to have new container platform being complementary to stuff like OpenStack, and OpenStack mixing the two, containers and VM. I'm sure that in the long term, a container-only approach is, from a design point of view, the ideal. But IT is never ideal. It's not about the best design ever. It's about trying to mix the old and the new. So from that point of view, it will remain messy, and with container and non-container technologies being mixed together for all sorts of reasons, maturity, security, etc.
I think that's a perfect segue for Avishay here. Avishay.
Yeah, so I agree with some of these statements. I do personally believe that it's complementary, and I don't see containers replacing virtual machines anytime soon. And then there are two different technologies, both of them very important, and I believe that users need to be given the option to be able to run their applications quickly and easily, regardless of the underlying technology. In terms of OpenStack, I agree that they're not going to be ditching virtual machines anytime soon or slimming down. Things similarly to how Ironic started, and Cinder started supporting that, and all the bits are got in line to support bare metal. I think we'll be seeing a similar thing with containers.
I think there's a general consensus here that OpenStack will embrace Docker, but wouldn't slim itself down, as I think Laurent mentioned, to be only containers and actually be the kind of universal interface to the complex infrastructure that enterprises have today. I think that would be hopefully a good summary of this prediction, which leads me to the kind of the new ways of embracing, and I think we've kind of discussed that part of how we use OpenStack as an abstraction there, and less of an infrastructure on its own. We kind of discussed that at the beginning. Do you see OpenStack, for example, becoming an abstraction to Azure or to Google Cloud or to Amazon? Do you see that happening anytime soon?
Well, I think we've started to head down that path with the identity service, right? So if you think about the work that's going on inside of the Keystone or identity platform to allow SAML authentication against other clouds, while the APIs may be different, it would allow you to, over time, add either other OpenStack or other clouds as other regions of your OpenStack cloud and allow you to interact with them similarly to how you would with your private cloud or your OpenStack cloud. So I think we're headed that way, but I don't know the level of integration, right? OpenStack has always been very shy about taking on the EC2 APIs or trying to manage proprietary APIs outside of their open framework. So it's going to be an interesting integration, but it looks like from an identity perspective, it's headed that way.
Mm-hmm. And anyone else want to comment about that?
Well, the Amazon Web Services debate. Oh, has been going on for years, and I don't see any resolution. Ideally, yes, OpenStack should support the Amazon Web Services API, and that's what people want. If you look at the survey results, that's what they want, because Amazon Web Services is the #1 destination for integration to OpenStack and from OpenStack. However, I don't think it's politically possible. So I see that, for me, the Amazon Web Services support has to shift from the core upstream project to the distributions. So it's up to the distribution people themselves to deliver on that integration. It's kind of interesting talking about interoperability. So interoperability is both integration and portability. And from an integration point of view, yes, the federated keystone technology allows integration with third-party stuff as well as between OpenStack clouds. But the truth is that while there is integration, there's not really portability between clouds, especially public clouds, because they are all different. And that's where, from a portability point of view, Docker provides an interesting addition, because Docker can deliver that portability Linux containers that people are after, and therefore it is true that a combination of OpenStack and container can deliver that interoperability, both at integration level, mostly with OpenStack, and portability level, mostly with containers.
Yeah, so that's I think interesting point about the Amazon API. I was actually asking about the opposite direction as well, which is to use OpenStack on top of Amazon or Azure or Google. Similar to what, if you think about what VMware did with IO, or what Stratoscale did with their own converged cloud infrastructure, and what Platform 9 is doing, the option is there. I mean,
yep. Yeah.
And so the question is, are we going to see more of that model being adopted also to make OpenStack integrated with other public clouds?
So, as you mentioned, Stratoscale, we have OpenStack API kind of over our own API. There are several other examples of companies that do that. I'm not sure if OpenStack will fully embrace, having talking to AWS, but we also see a trend of services that speak with a wide variety of different clouds, like OpenStack and Amazon. One of those examples is Clicker, so it lets you run your application on any cloud. So maybe that would be a more promising direction for the future.
Okay, so I think that gets us to the concluding comments, which is the hybrid cloud, and I think that Laurent, you almost summarized it already with the fact that you've identified hybrid cloud as an integration, less as a solution. And you also touched on the fact that Docker solved an important piece here, which is the portability of the workload itself. On the server itself, hybrid cloud has been a popular topic there. Let's use it as a kind of a concluding comment here on the prediction. Do you see OpenStack being used in a hybrid kind of context environment more so than it was used so far, which was mostly kind of a lab of its own and an environment of its own? And if so, which tools do you think would be used to do that type of integration work that Laurent mentioned? So I'll start with you, Jason.
Yeah, so the way I think about OpenStack now is most of the focus is on private clouds. And private clouds are likely going to become the center of the hybrid cloud platform, right? So if I think about the identity federation work going on and some of the other work going around the intent there is to make it so that my private cloud becomes the authentication endpoint for all of my other clouds. That allows me to do some interesting things with containers or with AWS or with Azure or with VMware, as we've talked about a number of times. I don't know what those tools are going to be yet. I think there's still some work to be done to understand how to even get the workloads to work between the two. I think there's some interesting software out there that's starting to lead the way, but we'll kind of see how that plays out.
And Laurent, what about Tosca? I mean, I know that you've covered that several times. I know that Tosca is an attempt to kind of...
Tosca is slightly different in as much as it is about portability of policy between orchestration platforms. So it's kind of a one level up. It's not about moving the workload as much as moving the compliance context of the workload between tools. But it's definitely the next, that's the next wave of optimizations. People are going to optimize workload placement on the basis of performance, of the basis of cost, as well as on the basis of compliance. And things like Tosca are meant to create policies that take all the various compliance, performance, and cost parameters in order to make an intelligent decision, and hopefully an automated one.
Excellent. So I think we've kind of reached the top of the hour here. This very interesting discussion here. I think I personally could continue that for another good hour, but we'll have to conclude and at least give our audience sometimes to digest all the information that they've been hearing here. So I would like to thank you everyone for joining this call and giving your insights. I know that some of you have jumped in on the last minute, so really, really thank you for that. And follow us on Facebook. You'll find the recording and some follow-up materials there. And thank you all for listening.
Great. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.